I never thought a birthday party could feel like a war zone until the day my in-laws left me out of theirs. It started with a whisper, a passing comment that felt like a punch to the gut. "We're planning a surprise party for your husband," my sister-in-law said almost casually. "You don't have to be involved. It's just family." Just family. Those words echoed in my mind, carving out a place where I didn't belong. I confronted my husband, expecting outrage, support, maybe even a fight. Instead, he shrugged and said, "They want it simple. I didn't think you'd want to come." I stared at him, disbelief bubbling into anger. This was my husband, the man I built a life with, and he was letting his family exclude me like I was a stranger. I felt invisible, dismissed, and most painfully, betrayed. That night, alone in our living room, I made a decision. If they wanted to exclude me, fine. But I wasn't going to be the forgotten wife, the outsider looking in. I wasn't going to let their plans go unchecked. I would take control, and I would do it on my own terms. The next morning, I began gathering information. The guest list, the venue, the caterers, even the entertainment. I called the party planner pretending to be a vendor interested in a different event. I tracked down the florist, got details from the bakery, and even spoke with the DJ, all under the guise of curiosity. Each call revealed more about their plans, and with every detail uncovered, my resolve hardened. But this wasn't about revenge. It was about dignity, about standing up when no one else would, about showing that exclusion doesn't have to be silent. If you've ever felt pushed aside by the people closest to you, this story is for you, because sometimes the biggest impact comes from the quietest actions taken with purpose. In the days that followed, I carefully pieced together every detail about the party my in-laws planned without me. I learned that the venue was a charming little banquet hall downtown, booked exclusively for an evening of celebration, completely excluding me. The guest list was full of family members, old friends, and people I barely knew, all invited to celebrate the man I loved, but somehow, without acknowledging my place beside him. The caterer was a high-end service, promising an elegant menu, and the DJ was booked for hours, ready to keep the party alive well into the night. Each piece of information felt like a quiet confirmation of my invisibility. But instead of sinking into despair, I felt a rising fire of determination. I wasn't just the wife standing outside the door. I was the one who could unlock it. I called the banquet hall, posing as an event coordinator, interested in renting the space for a client. I asked about the event schedule, vendors, and even requested a copy of the contracts to confirm availability. The manager, polite but unaware of my true intent, shared details generously. I spoke to the florist, suggesting I was scouting flowers for an upcoming wedding, and asked about delivery times and arrangements. The bakery was easy to contact, and I inquired about the custom cake design, pretending to be a close friend with a vague interest in the style. I even connected with the DJ through social media, chatting casually about playlists and setups, and he unwittingly confirmed the evening schedule and song preferences. Each conversation was a thread I pulled, unraveling their secret plans. But the turning point came when I got the idea to call the city's liquor licensing office, checking on the permits and restrictions for that banquet hall. The person on the phone mentioned that a complaint had been filed recently regarding noise levels, and enforcement was scheduled for that exact night. Suddenly, I had leverage. I was the person who could make their perfect party unravel. But I knew this had to be done carefully. I wasn't interested in ruining a celebration for everyone. I wanted to send a message, to reclaim respect, to assert that exclusion would have consequences. It was a delicate dance, balancing power and restraint, and I felt every moment of it coursing through my veins. My husband noticed my growing intensity and asked what I was up to, but I deflected, keeping my cards close. I wasn't ready for his judgment or to explain the fire burning inside me. When the day finally arrived, I was calm on the outside but storming on the inside. The phone in my hand was my secret weapon, the call I was about to make that would shift everything. If they thought excluding me would silence me, they were in for a surprise. Because sometimes the smallest voice becomes the loudest echo in the room. The morning of the party dawned gray and quiet, a stark contrast to the storm brewing inside me. I woke early, heart pounding with a mix of nerves and resolve. Every moment that day was a countdown, leading to the call I planned to make that would change everything. I reviewed my notes once more, the venue's license number, the manager's name, the complaint details. This wasn't about revenge. It was about reclaiming my dignity and reminding my in-laws that exclusion had consequences. As I dressed, I chose something simple but sharp. A navy blouse paired with jeans, projecting calm confidence rather than anger. I wanted to be the woman they underestimated, the one who would quietly dismantle their plans without a scene. The house was strangely silent as I left, the calm before the storm. I double-checked my phone, rehearsed the words I would say to the city officials, and then made the call. The person on the other end was professional, courteous, and efficient. I explained I was concerned about a private event scheduled at a downtown banquet hall that had recently received noise complaints. I provided the address, date, and time, mentioning that the neighbors had reported excessive noise and disruptions late into the night. The official thanked me for the information, assuring me that enforcement officers would be monitoring the event closely. That was all I needed to hear. I hung up and felt a surge of empowerment. This call wasn't just a nuisance. It was a strategic move in a long game. I sat back and texted a quick message to Michelle, my attorney, letting her know what I'd done. She responded immediately with encouragement. "Well played, keep your head up." Then I waited. Hours passed slowly, my phone buzzing periodically with updates from Michelle about possible legal ramifications if the party got shut down due to noise violations. The tension built like a drumbeat, growing louder in my chest. Meanwhile, my husband was oblivious to what was unfolding. He left the house that afternoon, heading to the party with a smile I knew was for everyone but me. I stayed home, focusing on preparing a simple dinner for Max and me, trying to appear normal, despite the whirlwind of emotions inside. The first call came just after dinner. A quiet voice from the city's noise enforcement unit. They had arrived at the venue and were monitoring noise levels closely due to previous complaints. I listened carefully as they assured me they would take action if the noise exceeded limits. Then, the second call. A report that enforcement officers had issued several warnings as the music grew louder, and at one point asked the DJ to turn it down. I could almost hear the shocked murmurs among the guests, the frustration of the party planner scrambling to keep things under control. Then, as the night wore on, the final message. The event had been forced to shut down early due to repeated noise violations and complaints from neighbors. The celebration that was meant to exclude me ended in unexpected chaos. I sat on the couch, phone in hand, feeling a strange mix of satisfaction and sadness. This wasn't about hurting my husband or his family. It was about standing up when I was pushed aside, about reminding everyone that invisibility has limits, that boundaries have consequences. Later, when my husband came home, the silence between us was thick. He didn't say a word about the party, but I knew the message had been delivered. Sometimes, the quietest voices carry the loudest truths. The days following the party's abrupt end were a whirlwind of hushed conversations and sharp glances. Mark was defensive, his pride wounded not just by the disruption, but by the realization that I was no longer a silent bystander in his family's affairs. The in-laws, once distant and dismissive, found themselves whispering behind closed doors, wondering how I had uncovered their secret plans. And more importantly, how I had the courage to act. I maintained a calm exterior, but inside, the satisfaction of reclaiming my place was profound. I wasn't just the overlooked wife anymore. I was the one with the power to change the narrative. Max, too, sensed the shift. One evening, as we sat on the couch, he turned to me and said, "Mom, you did something really brave." His words settled over me like a balm, reminding me that my fight wasn't just for myself, but for him as well. At home, I began setting new boundaries, not just with Mark, but with his family. Invitations to future events were filtered through me, and I made it clear that exclusion wouldn't be tolerated again. It wasn't about punishment. It was about respect. Slowly, the walls of exclusion began to crumble, brick by brick. The family gatherings that followed were different. Mark's relatives, once cold and distant, approached me with hesitant smiles and cautious conversations. I held my ground, accepting their overtures on my terms. The message was clear. I was here, present, and no longer invisible. Meanwhile, Max flourished. He attended school with renewed confidence, made new friends, and embraced his hobbies with joy. Our Sundays became sacred, breakfasts filled with laughter, park visits, and quiet moments that mended the fractures left by years of tension. One afternoon, Max showed me a drawing he'd made in art class, a family portrait with all the members holding hands in a circle. He pointed to the figure he'd drawn of me and said, "You're the glue." I smiled, tears welling. The glue? That's exactly what I was. Not just holding us together, but strengthening the bond, creating a space where we all belonged. But the journey wasn't without its struggles. Mark's attempts to rebuild bridges were clumsy, often self-serving. There were moments of hurt, misunderstandings, and the occasional clash. Yet, I learned to navigate those storms with grace, choosing when to fight and when to forgive. This wasn't about perfection, it was about progress. And through it all, I discovered something unexpected. The power of quiet resilience. The strength to stand firm without shouting, the courage to act without chaos, the wisdom to turn exclusion into inclusion, silence into voice, and pain into purpose. The weeks after the party's disruption unfolded like a complex dance of emotions, boundaries, and rebuilding trust. Not just with Mark, but with his family and, most importantly, with myself. The initial shockwaves of my call to the city officials had sent ripples far beyond that night, shaking the foundation of the relationships I'd once hoped would be a source of love and support. Mark's family, once indifferent or even hostile toward me, began to tread more carefully. Invitations to family dinners and gatherings came with hesitant apologies, awkward smiles, and subtle shifts in behavior. It was as if my quiet assertion had rewritten the rules, reminding everyone that respect was non-negotiable and exclusion had consequences. I kept my distance, observing their attempts to bridge the gap, but never fully letting my guard down. There were moments when old wounds surfaced, a pointed comment, a cold glance, but I held firm, responding with calm confidence rather than anger. My husband, caught between his family's expectations and the reality of our fractured relationship, oscillated between guilt and defensiveness. Sometimes he tried to mend things with words. Other times, he retreated into silence. I learned to accept that change would be gradual, requiring patience I wasn't sure I possessed, but was willing to cultivate for the sake of our future. At home, Max blossomed in ways that made every hardship worthwhile. His schoolwork improved, fueled by a newfound sense of security and belonging. He made friends more easily, joined clubs, and even started piano lessons, something he'd resisted before. One afternoon, he surprised me by bringing home a drawing of our family, all of us smiling and connected by a rainbow-colored thread. "This is us," he said simply, "stronger together." My heart swelled with pride and hope. Financially, the aftermath was tough. The party disruption meant some vendors had to be paid despite the cancellation, and the fallout with Mark meant tightening budgets. I juggled extra shifts, budgeted carefully, and leaned on friends who offered support without judgment. It was humbling but also empowering. Proof that I could face adversity head-on and still provide stability for Max. Michelle, my attorney, continued to be a steadfast ally, guiding me through the complexities of family law, property matters, and co-parenting negotiations. Her wisdom reminded me that strength was often quiet, built in preparation, persistence, and the courage to stand firm when others faltered. One evening, after a long day, Michelle and I sat over coffee reviewing new documents and emails from Mark's side. "They thought they could push you out silently," she said, "but you made sure your voice was heard, loud and clear." I smiled, feeling a deep satisfaction not from conflict but from reclaiming my place. The true surprise wasn't in disrupting a party or shaking a family. It was in discovering my own power, the power to rewrite my story and define my worth on my terms. And as I looked ahead, I knew this was only the beginning of a new chapter, one where respect, love, and dignity would be the foundation, not just for me and Max, but for the life we were building together. The weeks turned into months, and with each passing day, the reverberations from that night's unexpected disruption grew stronger and clearer in the fabric of our lives. What had started as a quiet, almost invisible act of defiance had blossomed into a profound turning point. A declaration that I would no longer accept sidelining or silence. Not from my in-laws, not from Mark, and certainly not from anyone who failed to recognize my place in our family. After the party's abrupt end, Mark's family was noticeably more cautious around me. The once icy stares thawed into tentative nods, and the whispered gossip softened into polite conversations. Invitations began to trickle in, not as mere formalities, but as genuine efforts to include me in their lives. I accepted some, declined others, always careful to protect my own boundaries while remaining open to healing. But this wasn't just about social acceptance. It was about reclaiming my dignity and reshaping the narrative of our family dynamic. At home, the energy shifted too. Mark, grappling with the fallout of that night and the growing distance between us, made clumsy attempts to reconnect. Not just with me, but with Max. He began showing up for more family dinners, tried to engage in conversations, and even took an interest in Max's schoolwork and hobbies. Max, however, remained cautious, his trust earned only slowly, piece by fragile piece. One chilly autumn evening, as we sat together in the living room surrounded by the soft glow of lamps and the quiet hum of the city outside, Max handed me a school project, a heartfelt essay on family and resilience. "Read this, Mom," he said softly. As I read his words, carefully penned and brimming with emotion, tears welled up. He wrote about the strength it took to keep going when people around you faltered, about the courage to stand firm in love and truth, and about how I was his hero, not for perfection, but for showing up every day. That night, after tucking Max into bed, I reflected on how far we'd come. The journey hadn't been easy. It had been marked by heartbreak, betrayal, and loneliness, but it had also revealed reservoirs of strength I never knew I had. I was no longer just surviving. I was thriving. Professionally, I found new purpose too. I returned to passions and pursuits I'd shelved for too long, reconnecting with friends and rekindling hobbies that nourished my spirit. The support network around me grew stronger, a reminder that I was never truly alone. Financially, the path remained challenging but manageable. Budgeting became an act of empowerment rather than restriction. Every paid bill was a victory, every saved dollar a testament to resilience. Michelle remained my steady ally, her legal expertise guiding me through ongoing negotiations and helping me establish clear co-parenting arrangements that prioritized Max's well-being. She reminded me that power isn't always loud. Sometimes it's the quiet, persistent presence of someone who refuses to be erased. One afternoon, I received a call from Mark. His voice was tentative, almost vulnerable. "I want to do better," he said. "Not just for Max, but for us." I listened carefully, knowing that words alone weren't enough, but also recognizing the significance of the moment. "Actions speak louder," I replied. "Show me." That conversation marked a new chapter, not necessarily one of reconciliation, but of possibility. Healing wouldn't be linear or easy, but it was no longer impossible. As I hung up, I felt a quiet hope settle within me. This was more than a surprise party disrupted. It was a life reclaimed, a future rewritten. A reminder that when you stand firm in your truth, even the smallest voice can change the course of everything. As the seasons changed, so did the rhythm of our lives. The ripple effect of that disrupted party stretched far beyond what anyone could have anticipated. Mark's family, once distant and dismissive, began to cautiously acknowledge my presence. Invitations to family gatherings trickled in, not out of obligation, but with a genuine, albeit tentative, warmth. I accepted some invitations, declined others, always mindful to protect the fragile peace we were building. The dynamic between Mark and me remained complex. His efforts to reconnect were uneven. Some days marked by sincere attempts to engage, others by withdrawal and silence. I learned to navigate this new terrain with patience and strength, setting boundaries that prioritized my well-being and that of Max. Max, now growing more confident and secure, continued to flourish in school and in his friendships. His trust in Mark, however, was a different story. It had to be earned, slowly and carefully. One afternoon, Max brought home a school project that struck me deeply, an essay titled, "What Family Means to Me." As I read his words, written with the clarity and honesty only a child can wield, I was moved to tears. He spoke of resilience, love, and the strength it takes to keep going when things are hard. He described me as his hero, not for perfection, but for showing up day after day. That moment crystallized everything for me. Our journey was far from over, but it was one of growth, healing, and hope. I found new strength not just in motherhood, but in reclaiming my identity beyond the shadows of betrayal and exclusion. Professionally, I re-engaged with passions long set aside, rebuilding a support network that reminded me I was never truly alone. Financial challenges persisted, but budgeting became empowerment rather than burden, each step forward a testament to resilience. Michelle, my attorney, continued to be a steady guide through the evolving legal landscape, ensuring Max's best interests remained front and center. Then, one unexpected call shifted the balance once again. Mark's voice was hesitant but earnest. "I want to do better," he said simply. "Not just for Max, but for us." I listened, wary yet open. "Actions speak louder," I replied. "Show me." It was a fragile beginning to a new chapter, one not guaranteed to be perfect, but filled with possibility. As I hung up, a quiet hope settled within me. This was more than a disrupted party or a battle for respect. It was a story of reclaiming power, rewriting narratives, and proving that even the smallest voice can change everything when it refuses to be silenced. The journey from exclusion to empowerment was neither swift nor simple. It was a road paved with difficult conversations, tentative steps toward forgiveness, and the steady rebuilding of trust, not just between Mark and me, but within the wider family we both shared. After the party's fallout, the in-laws' attitudes began to shift, in subtle yet meaningful ways. Invitations that once ignored me now included thoughtful gestures, texts asking if I'd like to join for coffee, or updates about family events. These moments were cautious bridges, signaling a tentative willingness to mend fences. I approached each interaction with a guarded optimism, aware that past wounds ran deep and healing would require time and patience. Mark, for his part, was navigating his own transformation. The weight of his mistakes was evident in the way he tried to engage with Max, who remained cautious but increasingly receptive. Their visits grew from supervised encounters into more relaxed afternoons, filled with shared laughter over homework and weekend outings to the park. One afternoon, I watched them from the kitchen window, Mark teaching Max to ride his bike, both of them smiling despite the shadows of the past. It was a small victory, but a victory nonetheless. At home, Max thrived in ways that buoyed my spirit. His school achievements improved, fueled by newfound confidence and the stability we worked so hard to create. He embraced his hobbies with enthusiasm. Drawing, soccer, and piano lessons that once seemed unlikely now became part of his daily routine. One evening, after a particularly joyous recital, Max hugged me tightly and whispered, "Thanks for never giving up on me, Mom." Those words carried the weight of every sleepless night and every battle fought on our behalf. Financially, the path remained challenging but manageable. I continued to juggle work, budgeting carefully, and seeking support when needed. The stress was ever present, but so was the determination to provide a better future for Max. Michelle remained a steadfast ally, guiding me through legal complexities and advocating for arrangements that prioritized our son's well-being. Through it all, I discovered the true meaning of strength, not in loud declarations or dramatic gestures, but in quiet resilience, unwavering love, and the courage to claim one's place with dignity and grace. The surprise I gave my husband that night wasn't a public spectacle or a grand revenge. It was the revelation that exclusion would no longer silence me. It was the assertion that I was not a footnote in his family's story, but a vital chapter. And it was the promise that, no matter the obstacles, I would fight for respect, love, and belonging, not just for myself, but for the son who deserved a whole world. If you've ever felt invisible, sidelined, or underestimated, know this: your voice matters. Your story deserves to be heard. Share your thoughts below, like and subscribe if this story moved you, and pass it on to someone who needs to know they're not alone. Because sometimes the greatest power lies not in what others say about us, but in what we say to ourselves when no one else is listening.